Welcome to another episode in the podcast series put on by Helping Crisis 246, where we focus on teaching what you can do in a mental or emotional crisis and where you can find help. Now, the podcast does not only focus on moments of crises, but teaches everyday methods, coping strategies that you can use to deal with some of life's most difficult moments. I'm Michelle Russell. I'm an attorney and a mental health advocate. And if you want to know why I'm so passionate about this topic of mental health, I invite you to watch episode 1. Now, whereas we don't always focus on crises moments when we're doing the podcast, today's episode is going to zone in particularly on that. When you feel like you're on the edge, when you feel overwhelmed and like you can't go any further, and when you feel or are contemplating thoughts of suicide. So today I'm going to have with me mental health advocate David Johnson, and we're going to have the painful conversation about suicide and do our best in the discussion to give some insights into the minds of persons who get to that point and what you can do if you think a loved one or someone you know might be that close to the edge. Now, I wish to make clear that the information that will be discussed today is nothing more than a discussion. I'll be discussing it from my own personal experience as someone who in my 20s, I was diagnosed with clinical depression and a couple of other disorders, and I also had suicidal ideations. So anything I say will really be from my own personal experience. And I also lost 3 friends to suicide. And so I would have had experiences with them and mentally what they went through. But the information is not intended to replace medical or professional advice. And if you feel that you are struggling emotionally or mentally, we really do encourage you to seek help from any of the helpline numbers, any of the local therapists that do help through the platform, or any other therapist, but reach out for help from a professional. So I'm just going to turn over to the conversation between David Johnson and myself. Hi, David. Well, thanks for agreeing to be with us today.
Such a pleasure to be with you, Michelle. Thanks for the invite.
Okay, so David, you are the founder of Let's Unpack It. Explain to us what that is.
Yeah, so Let's Unpack It, really just a digital advocacy space right now in the mental health forum. We started back in January 2020, really as a safe online space for young people to come and discuss and learn more about mental health and wellness. The reason why I started it was because I realized that my peers did not have that kind of space. And actually what was the final push really was one day I posted on social media asking people how they cope with stress. And I got a myriad of responses and they really said to me, hey, listen, young people don't have that kind of space where they can go and open up and feel free to talk about mental health. And so I wanted to be a part of that change to kind of push back the stigma. Of course, you would know that January 2020 was just before the COVID-19 pandemic descended upon the Caribbean fully. And really, it was out of a sense of frustration then that we pivoted from just that awareness space into full-fledged advocacy. So our work over the last 3 years, or 3.5 years rather, has been really trying to build a national and a regional conversation about mental health and wellness, and to collaborate with our third sector and governmental partners to move forward action specifically for youth across the Caribbean. So that's a bit about the initiative and why we're here.
Well, you've made inroads into local policies that the government is considering or planning to roll out in terms of mental health. You could tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think fortunately, unfortunately, we formed our organization or got into the advocacy space at a time where the conversation about mental health was at its peak. Because for the first time, perhaps in modern day history, we were all at a common level in the sense of everybody realized, hey, I'm really not doing that well. I'm really not coping that well. All the things that were normal in terms of my life patterns are being disturbed. And mental health, I really have to do something about it, right? And so I think because of that, because we were out there in the space, putting out the content, having the conversations, hosting the panel discussions and so on, I think people realize that, hey, these young people are committed and they know what they're talking about. And so one thing led to another in terms of we got invitations from UNICEF to come into conversations. We got invitations through Healthy Caribbean Coalition as well. One of our major projects has been working with them on what was the Caribbean Mental Health Call to Action. Right from inception all the way to implementation, we were there. And so through that initiative in particular, we were able to connect with the Ministry of Health in Barbados, the Ministry of Youth in Barbados, and also across the board. And our most recent effort has been in partnership with UNICEF Eastern Caribbean to roll out the Caribbean National Mental Health Focal Points Network, which we think is going to be a major initiative in terms of getting the youth to the table, in terms of implementing the kind of policies and strategies that they want to see. Of course, we've been a part of the in terms of Barbados now, a national conversation around the development of a new mental health action plan. We've been invited to the table, we've attended the stakeholders meetings, and we've been able to contribute the youth voice in that sense. But I don't want to suggest in any form of fact or fashion that, you know, young people are so intimately involved in the process. We do want to see more. We want to see more meaningful youth engagement and the consideration of young people as key stakeholders and experts on the matter. Because how ridiculous is it that you can try to bring a policy that impacts young people without considering that? Yeah. And so what we really want to be doing as an organization is to push forward the Caribbean youth voice.
So since you've been in this space of mental health conversation and advocacy, and you deal with the young people, is it fair to assume that they probably reach out to you from time to time to express their own concerns and stresses? What would you say are the major stressors for persons within this age group that you target? And you could let us know what the age group is, like what, 15 to 25? Like, how young you got to be part of your target group?
Great. So we're targeting youth, right? And so I think by definition, it moves somewhere between 14 to 29. Some go all the way up to 35. But definitely our main target group at this point is are young people in that 15 to 24 age category, right? And so, yes, from time to time, people do reach out to us in terms of messaging our page. They're looking for resources. They're looking for some form of assistance. And we try our best to make it known clearly that we're not mental health professionals, but we are happy to listen and flag and say, okay, well, here's where you can go and get some assistance. But beyond that, in terms of when we host our lives and when we do panel discussions and so on, we hear a lot from young people. And the thing is, most young people are not complaining for like a single symptom or a single group of symptoms. What they're complaining really about is not having access to care, right? They don't have the critical support systems that they want to see, or they're having challenges with school, for instance, and whereas they want to go to some of the psychological services offered at their university, for instance, the waiting times are too long. So things like that are what they're mostly concerned about. They're also concerned about the fact that up till now, we don't have a 24/7, 365 crisis hotline in Barbados. That's problematic because the idea is that you want people to be able to know, when I have a challenge, here's where I can go for help. So the majority of the concerns that they're talking about are really revolving around lack of access. Access is not affordable. I'm on medications, but the medications are not there every month, or it's too much to be able to pay for therapy or to even get the medications that I need to make sure that my mental health is secure. So that's the major kind of report that we're getting from young people, certainly within Barbados.
Okay, understood. Now you said something very important. At least I find it very important. Are we moving more towards crisis now?
Yeah.
You said sometimes the time in between appointments to see a psychologist is just too long. And this is one of my personal issues, because back in my 20s, when I was diagnosed with clinical depression, it often felt like I was to schedule my bad days so that you don't have an appointment for another 2 weeks. But what happens when you have bad moments in between? So that on the one hand, you can't blame psychiatrists or psychologists, because the reality is this is their livelihood.
Yep.
And the schedules might just be full because they're good at what they do.
Correct. Yeah.
But there has to be an in-between support system
Yeah.
that is available in colleges, that's available in some workplaces, that is available at the national level, which is where I guess this hotline can become useful, because there's no scheduled breakdown or a scheduled bad day, but you could pick up a phone and talk to someone on the other line, because more often than not, like you say, a lot of the complaint is access to support.
Yeah.
More often than not, what people need is support.
Yeah.
And the absence of support, especially when you're in a delicate frame of mind, can literally be the difference between life or death.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you talk about something like support, support is multifaceted, right? It can no longer be, okay, well, lock away these people and get them off the streets and they'll be fine, and overload the psychiatric hospital and everybody else will just get on with their lives, right? We need a more comprehensive approach that considers awareness, that considers helping families, that considers that there are socioeconomic factors that impact on mental health, right? We need something more comprehensive that looks at the lifespan, that looks at, okay, what kind of initiatives can we do for very young children? What can we do for the middle-aged people? And what can we do for our seniors? Something that looks at, okay, well, this particular family, and I know the government has made efforts in terms of helping vulnerable families. But too often when we talk about vulnerability and risk and so on, we're talking strictly economics. We're not realizing that there are human beings that have to live through some of these very horrible situations or very horrible events, right? So when we talk about support, what I would love to see is a very integrated system where the referral pathway for a patient who is on medications considers, okay, what kind of social services do they need access to? What kind of job opportunities can they get involved in? Because at the end of the day, we still know things like stigma and discrimination are at play, and no matter what policy we implement in a very isolated way to tackle discrimination, unless we have a more integrated sense of, we're changing work cultures, we're making sure that there are adequate opportunities for persons living with mental illnesses to also have access to work. Something as fundamental as that is integral if we're really trying to tackle this in a holistic way. But even going back to the challenge that, we don't teach our young people how to cope, right? And so it's okay to say, all right, well, we need to package the resources and we need to do a directory. All of these things are great. But what happens when it's, 1 a.m. in the morning and I'm in a crisis? Do I have somewhere to go? Do I have someone to lean on? Do I have the coping strategies that I need to get me through that period of time before I could connect with a clinician again? Right. And I think if we consider this in a very comprehensive way, similarly to what we're doing with NCDs, which, by the way, mental health really ought to be included in, I think we would have a better response, and we'd have more resources, more access if we looked at this in a comprehensive way, for sure.
So that I like the idea of a comprehensive approach, because I do follow you. I follow your page, and I realize you really do attack it at the policy level. I like to attack it at the personal level, which is, how do I make it every single day?
Right.
What are breathing techniques I can use? What about self-awareness, so I can tell when my anxiety levels are high? What are the little clues that I'm taking short breaths, which means I'm probably worried about something? My sleeping pattern has changed, so that what's keeping me up, that ability to have a level of self-awareness and then engage in compassionate self-inquiry to figure out, where am I at emotionally today, right now? And what is this thing that may be bothering me that I'm ignoring, or that's in my subconscious, but it's influencing my behavior, and it's influencing physical symptoms like indigestion, loss of appetite, or too much appetite, too much sleep, demotivation. Because when you can catch yourself earlier, it is often it's often easier to cope and to manage in everyday life and everyday stressors and difficult moments than it is when you find yourself already at the edge. It is so much harder to pull back. So that I agree with the integrated approach, and wonder whether they would even consider that guidance classes should be more than sexual education.
Right.
And we have, I don't know what it's like now. Back in my day, I was about 40 something years ago. Well, not so bad. Guidance would have been 30 something years ago. It was very surface. It was mostly reproductive organs.
Yep.
I don't remember them ever talking about emotions. I don't remember them ever saying it's okay to cry.
Yeah.
And if you are feeling something you don't understand, consult with an adult or a peer. If you're having a bad situation at home, come and talk to us. I don't remember ever touching anything that would be considered or mental, emotional, or social well-being. It was mostly reproductive organs, how you have sex and don't have sex because you'll get pregnant.
Exactly.
That's really what guidance class was. And I wonder whether the curriculum should be expanded from first form, because at 11 you have enough capacity to understand certain things, and that it grows each year up to sixth form, that the guidance curriculum is about teaching emotional intelligence. Like I've seen, I don't remember the name of the guy I saw him in the paper, and he's going around to schools trying to teach that. Teach emotional intelligence, teach self-awareness, teach compassionate self-inquiry, because when we're teaching every child this, they can recognize danger signs in their friends,
Right.
They can recognize it in their parents, their cousins, that they can recognize it. And we end up raising a whole generation that's more self-aware and more able to cope. But we can teach them stuff like the exercise isn't just to lose weight, but improves your mental health through the release of feel-good hormones and lessens your cortisol. But we can teach them meditation and breath work and mindfulness, and it's not seen as an affront to prayer, because we're not saying one or the other, we're saying all
together.
Well, correct. We can teach them that music and extracurricular activities where they get to do non-school stuff is important for the holistic body. And when we can teach them to accept failure. Because I think one of the biggest problems in our educational system is promoting this thing that you're only good if you're great.
Yeah.
Come in the top 5, top 10 even. Anything after that, you ain't good enough.
And then what are you left to do?
Exactly. So people, I personally find in your age group, the few I deal with, they all speak of this pressure of not just passing, but passing well.
Yeah.
They all speak of the pressure of the amount of work they have to learn. And like, I've been an attorney, this year makes 20 years. And I can tell you that maybe I used maybe 40% of what I learned at UE. But you needed it to pass.
Yes, you did.
And we don't think about how these things are affecting the mental health of our youth and of our children. And we need to educate parents to know the signs. And this is where I'm coming around to what you alluded to earlier. This week, in the space of about 7 days, we had 3 suicides. One was a 54-year-old woman, 2 were 23 and 22, and there was one at the end of May, which was a gentleman. Makes 4 for the year. And it's like you said, there's a usual shock and uproar that comes initially after these events, with people saying why, how. Not enough people I find inquire into the level of despair. It tends to go along the lines of why did they feel they had to do this? But that's not compassionate self-inquiry or inquiry. That's judgmental. Like, you're too young to have given up already.
Yeah.
What do you believe are some of the factors that would get someone in their 20s to that point?
It's tragic. I don't know about whoever is watching this, but every time I hear of one of these situations, my heart literally feels as though it's ringing. And it hurts even more when I realize that the people who are dying in this way are in my age category. I'm 24 years old, right? And when we talk about support and an absence of support, the reality is we can do all we want at our schools. We can teach all we want at our schools, but if we're sending our children back into households that do not appreciate mental health and wellness, that do not appreciate the importance of empathy, that do not understand that, when a child comes home, they want to feel safe, right? If we're sending our children back into toxic environments, what are we doing, right? And I don't say this in a way to cast blame on anyone, because I really do believe that we failed our parents and we failed our children by not teaching them the skills and the tools that they need to cope, right? And I think we need to do more so that we can have open, frank, honest conversations about emotions, recognizing that this superficial thing that we call strength, which we loosely define as the ability to cope with everything and to carry every load without ever reaching out for help, young people are not living up to that standard, right? And when they realize that they can't have a conversation with you, that's an immediate barrier, an immediate blockade. But then again, I think the third issue, and I'll wrap up on this point, is the idea of vulnerability. And I know recently we've been seeing a number of deaths, particularly of young women. And this is something that we never really used to see before. And I think it's an increased cause of concern, right? Because in terms of young men, we could have always said, okay, well, vulnerability is the problem and young men don't like to seek help, and maybe we need to do more in that sense. But I'm worried now in a broader sense that even our young women are not being equipped with what is necessary in terms of expressing their concerns, reaching out for help, and coping with their emotions. And I think, again, it goes back to the narrative that we created about strength. The idea that to be vulnerable automatically makes you weak. And that when you reach out to somebody, the first thing they say, well, you can handle that, you good man, or you'll get through this, rather than sitting down and listening to you. Something as simple as asking someone how they are and waiting for a response, we haven't gotten that right. Yeah. And so vulnerability is not going to just land in our lap, right? And let's not also forget that too often when we hear these stories, we also hear that these are people who've been dealing with challenges for a very long time, or they've been bullied. That's what we hear for a very long time, right? And so I think it's really time that we have, again, a more holistic conversation about this, and we really check ourselves as a nation and see that the things that we've done as a matter of practice, let's not continue to do them just because that's the way it's always been done. Let's realize that there's a new and a better way to do things that's more informed by evidence and more informed by human behavior, because everyone needs love. Everyone has gone through something where they feel like they're in crisis, they're challenged, and they really just want somebody to reach out an arm and say, hey, I've got you, I'm here for you, and I'm here to listen. And if we can get that right, I do think that we're going to be making headway in terms of getting the whole thing right, in terms of getting mental health and wellness made a priority for all, and making it easier for people to overcome that barrier and that awkwardness to say, hey, I need help. I'm not feeling my best, and I just need some love and some care at this moment.
Most people won't go that far. Huh? They might say, I need some help.
Yeah.
I rarely ever say I need some love because I feel too vulnerable and raw.
Yeah.
But even if we strip it back a bit, they might even say I need some help. More often than not, somebody asking for help is doing it indirectly. And I often say, pay attention to the cues. The person who's called you out of the blue, but doesn't really have much to say on the phone, and they're lingering.
Yeah.
As someone who wants something and doesn't know how to ask for it. Yeah. The person who just asks, can I pass by? And you're like, wait, is something wrong? But they won't answer. Is someone saying, I can't be alone right now, but they're too ashamed to say it. Yeah. The person who you find all of a sudden is going out all the time, and they never used to. I'm not talking to people who always used to party, but all of a sudden them just want to party all the time, and you're like, this is strange. That's someone acting out. They're avoiding being alone with themselves. They're avoiding pain. They're avoiding something, especially if they have recently experienced some trauma. The loss, they could have lost a loved one, so they might be grieving, or could have had a broken heart, or lost a job, or failed an exam. And they're like, oh, I'm fine.
Yeah.
They're dealing with it the best way they know how, which is not always the healthiest way.
Yeah.
And which is why the checking in beyond the surface. Because more often than not, the reason we don't go deeper is because of our own problems, our own. And by that I mean, sometimes we don't want to know the truth. Yeah. Because we're afraid that if you confess to me you're not doing well, I'm forced to make a decision. Can I make time for you now? What am I going to do about it? But I really wanted to go to this fete. And that is why I think sometimes we don't really want to inquire into the well-being of the people around us, that we see little cues like something might be off because it might be inconvenient to us.
Yeah.
And we'll feel less guilty if we didn't do something because we didn't know than
Yeah.
if we knew and didn't do something. So that
Yeah.
it goes back to we have to look at ourselves. And we're talking here, and I remember on Tuesday when we learned about the other suicide, you and I were messaging on IG, and I won't forget you said, you know what, Michelle, I'm gonna go check on my team, make sure they're okay.
Yeah. It's
This is
absolutely
what
important.
support looks like. You know, you
Yeah.
might be going along and everybody seems fine, and you can really, honest to God, get caught up in your life. And it's not a bad thing, it's
Yeah.
normal. But sometimes you have to do that whole stop and go, ooh, I need to check in.
Yeah. I think again, because it's incongruent with what we know to be normal human behavior, I think there is credence to this being something that is taught, right? Teaching people how to show up for others, right? And again, I always say in other forums that there there's a crisis of responsibility in our region at the moment. You have governments who talk and don't follow up with action. You have people in communities who see problematic behavior and don't do anything about it because I know my business and I talk about your child and then a parent come in telling me nothing, right? But if we cast our mind back 20 years ago, it was absolutely normal to see a child walk into school and say, young man, how you doing? I ain't see you in a long time. You good? Try and keep your school butts here. And whether or not the young person reacted to you in a way that was pleasant or not, guaranteed it stuck with them. And the moment that you don't see a neighbor that you used to see standing at the window all the time, there's a level of worry that takes place there and a level of natural inquiry that you should feel led to follow, right? But I feel as though, like you said, there's some things that we just don't do either because we feel as though we're not equipped to handle it or because we've got too much going on in our own lives. And again, I think there's a benefit to having these kind of safe spaces. Imagine if you had 3 friends who decided, okay, every Thursday we'll do some kind of little games night or something, and you use that as an event to kind of say, let's talk about how our week has been going. And I think too often when we think about intervention, we think about this thing that we see on TV where you go sit them down and ask them these rigid 10 questions. No, just being there and having a conversation can open up so much more about what's going on, right? But I think, again, just having that next level of support as well, people being aware of, okay, I have a friend, they're showing these signs, I'm concerned, how do I approach them? And then when I approach them and I realize something is really happening, who can I call? Who can I direct them to? And so I know friends, for instance, who they go and they see a licensed therapist or counselor, and in their own friend groups as well, they have people who know their counselor's number, so they know if they see these signs, then it's okay that if I'm worried, I can breach that confidentiality only then to say, okay, I'm really concerned, and I think something more needs to be done here. So there's going to need to be some kind of shift in our national conscience around this particular thing. And you always hear from time to time, I was talking to them just yesterday and I didn't spot anything. And because, we've been wired to think that mental health, mental illness, mental crisis is always going to be these overt signs, right? And I think we need to do more to teach people, okay, how to connect, how to follow your intuition, how to ask. And I think too often we feel as though we're doing enough by simply asking somebody, how are you? And again, I'm not saying this to cast any blame or to add any insult to injury. I'm
Just
just
to
saying that
educate.
we need to educate, to say, look, there's a deeper level of inquiry that can take place that you can pinpoint and flag. Like, hey, I noticed that, we used to go out every week, but nowadays you don't seem so active. Is there anything going on, right? Going a little deeper with that inquiry. And it's not trying to be somebody's therapist. It's showing them that you care and that, you're not getting all up in their business, but it's like, hey, I'm here for you. And if you want to talk about it, I'm here to talk about it. I'm here to just listen, right?
Well, to end, I want us to just kind of stay on the support point a little through. And I'm going to say this because I think we'd be in error if we put all the responsibility on the people who are trying to help. If you are the person who is struggling, overwhelmed, panic, emotions, hopelessness, despair. I said this morning in an interview that one of the hardest things about depression and why you tend to have suicidal thoughts is it's hard to imagine your life will be any different. If it's the only thing you knew, the only way you've known is this abusive household, or constantly, like you've gone a year without a job or 6 months without a job and the bills are piling up and the debt is piling up. It's hard to imagine it's going to be different a month from now or a year from now. And so it's easier to escape it. And you're going to have to start believing in things you can't see. And I'm not here to preach Christianity and faith and any such thing, but believing in a tomorrow, and a tomorrow that won't keep you stuck. Yeah. But a lot of that work is going to be internal, learning not to believe your own thoughts. Thoughts aren't truth. Thoughts are just things we concoct based on the stories we tell ourselves, but they don't equal fact. And letting people in, because perspective matters. Yeah. When you are drowning in your own thoughts, it's the only thing you can see. And sometimes you need that one person or that two persons who are honestly trying. Don't block them out, because they can give you the perspective you need to live till tomorrow, and then next month, and then next year. So to the person struggling, I would say, don't always shut others out. We need each other. To the person who's been trying and been continually shut out, God, keep trying. Keep trying. And as much as I support therapy, I'm going to say this. You have to find the right fit.
Yeah.
There's some therapists that will be an awful experience for you. I had that, and I've had a lot of people tell me that. It doesn't mean you won't be able to find the right fit in someone else. But I'd always also say, don't push the narrative. If someone says they don't want to go to therapy right now, don't push it, because they just get resistant and turn their mind away from it. So leave it alone. You can direct them to podcasts, to books, to IG pages, to videos that might help, but give it to them in bite-sized pieces. Yeah. And even if they already have a therapist, don't force them to go on days they don't want to. But don't leave them alone either, because I assure you, what they're looking for is support. And generally, they'll come around eventually and go back to their therapist, etc. So it will always come down to support. David, what closing words would you have to give guidance on how we navigate this?
Yeah, I think the buzzword that I want to use is hope, right? And hearing you mention the idea of having people who could get you to a point of thinking that you want to continue to tomorrow, and they help you again, and they're there for you again. And I think hope is what we need in our society right now. Hope for young people, hope for young lives. Too often the narrative is that people are lost. And I don't believe that. I don't believe the idea that we should castigate people and say, look, there ain't no hope for you. I think when we give up on people, we give them an excuse not to try, right? And what I
want you to say that again.
Yeah,
that is important.
Yeah, when we honestly, like when we leave people on that side path, right, and tell them that they're lost, we don't give them that hope. It's really that excuse to say, okay, I'm done trying. Right. And I do think that more needs to be done in the sense of families, even in the sense of faith-based communities, in the sense of our schools and our workplaces, to build that hope. And something like checking in and just knowing that somebody cares, making a plan for tomorrow. Look, let's go catch a bite tomorrow and catch up. If you don't want to talk about this, is okay. Let's just talk about something else. Right. But just on a national level, I do call on us to take more responsibility at an individual level, reaching out and getting the help and support that we need. And like you, Michelle, I've had my own challenges in terms of being that person who is always there for others. But when it comes to my thing, I want to fix it. Or at least want to try and fix it first until I have reached that point where I can't. But I've been learning slowly but surely that it's okay to lean on somebody else, right? It's okay to get that input and get that perspective that you're talking about. So that's at the individual level. And at a community level, I hope that communities will come together and find their own ways of supporting fellow members. And if you see someone that's struggling, I know there's a level of awkwardness that comes about, but I want to encourage us to overcome that hurdle and just reach out. Just ask a question. Just say something. So that's my overall call, just for the building of hope and intervention to save lives. And of course, particularly young lives. Just putting that out there. So
Beautiful.
Thanks so much for this opportunity, Michelle.
Thank you, David. So many wise words shared today. Thanks, David.
Thanks so much. Take care.